Hi, I'm Helen Bauer, and this is the Heart of Hospice podcast. The Heart of Hospice podcast is your source for compassionate and informative discussions about hospice and end-of-life care. I'm a certified hospice and palliative care nurse with over 15 years of experience. Whether you're a caregiver, someone with a serious illness, or you simply need to know more about hospice care, this podcast is for you. Join me as we explore all the aspects of hospice, from the details of caregiving to the emotional and spiritual dimensions of end-of-life journeys. For more resources and to connect with me, visit theheartofhospice.com and find us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Keep listening for today's episode.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
This special episode of the Heart of Hospice podcast is being sponsored by the Death Deck, featuring the End of Life Deck. The End of Life Deck is used by many healthcare providers as a casual way to help start conversations about end-of-life wishes. It helps people communicate what matters most to them. To learn more about the EOL deck, visit thedeathdeck.com.
Today's special episode is part one of a four-part series featuring hospice educator Barbara Karnes. Barbara began her hospice career in the 1970s here in the U.S. She's worked as a staff nurse, a clinical supervisor, and an executive director. Barbara's book, Gone From My Sight, is now an industry standard for explaining the death and dying process. It's sold over 40 million copies and is commonly known as the Little Blue Book. Barbara's the expert that end-of-life workers go to for guidance and leadership. You can find her resources at bkbooks.com. You're going to hear Barbara's story about how she really wanted to be a social worker instead of a nurse, but her mother coaxed her into going into nursing. Barbara shared with me her favorite part of being a nurse at the bedside and the ritual she always had and what she said when she knocked on the door to see a patient. Barbara and I also talked about the qualities that are needed to be a great hospice leader. Things like comprehensive knowledge of hospice, ensuring your staff has a great knowledge of hospice, and how to support the staff as well. Barbara and I talked about self-care, not really a concept for those who were working in hospice when she first started out, and how she created a group of like-minded nurses who could debrief with each other and take care of each other. She shared her greatest strengths and weaknesses as a hospice nurse and a leader. If you want to connect with Barbara, read her blog, check out her products. Her website is bkbooks.com. Take time to listen to Barbara's story. I hope it inspires and encourages you. Barbara, welcome back to the podcast. It's so great to have you with me.
Oh, it's always great to be back. We have some really interesting conversations when we're together.
We do, and I'm so excited about this series because I think it's going to be really special. We're basically going start to finish, except you haven't finished working in end-of-life care yet, but we're going to be talking about everything in your career, everything about hospice and where it's going these days and what your experience has been. So before we get started with our questions in our interview, I have, of course, a card from the End of Life deck. So I know you love them. So this is how we're going to get started. This is an easy one. This is called Official Officiant. Who would you want to officiate your memorial service or funeral service?
Oh, that's an interesting question because I don't want a memorial service or a funeral service. What we did with my husband was, well, let me back up and say, we have a family tradition that when anyone leaves our house, we all stand, or just maybe sometimes just me, stands on the porch and give a Karnes send-off. And we wave until the car is out of sight. We did that when Jack died, and the station wagon that took his body, the whole family stood on the front porch, tears and all, and waved and gave him a Karnes send-off. I want a Karnes send-off.
Is it too early in the interview to cry a little bit? You know our philosophy on the Heart of Hospice podcast, that if anybody cries, whether it's the guest or the host, then it was a good interview. I love that, Barbara. That's so sweet. So that'll be your official send-off, is the Karnes goodbye.
It will be. Now, all of that really depends upon, in my mind, my perfect dying is that I'm at home and that the family, sister, all the grandkids are here. And just like we supported Jack and we were all here, I'm hoping that that's how my end of life will be. And if it's not, then they're going to have to figure out what to do, because this is my plan.
I like that. You can't plan for every contingency.
You can't.
No.
But I can say, here's my ideal. Here's what I want. Now, you guys make it happen.
I like that. Yeah. Here's your instruction. Do your best. Perfect. Yes. Okay, so let's dive in to your career, your work as an end-of-life worker, a hospice nurse. And really, you're probably going to deny this, but a very beloved icon when it comes to end-of-life care and end-of-life resources. You are the author of Gone From My Sight, what we call the Little Blue Book. It's even got its own nickname, and it's sold an crazy number of copies all over the world. It's amazing, and we are so grateful for the leadership that you've shown in all these years of your time working in hospice. So let's go back to the beginning, when you first got started. You were working in home health and hospice. You've got experience on both sides. What made you choose to work exclusively in end-of-life care?
Well, I started out when hospice, well, it was in the 80s. There was no Medicare. There was no nothing. And all of us there were really there because our heart led us there. It wasn't a job. It was an avocation. And because there was no reimbursement sources at that time, it was simply memorials and donations. I got our hospice home health certified. This is before anyone even talked about hospice certification. And it was, as long as I followed home health rules in documentation, then that was a reimbursement source. When hospice Medicare came into the picture, then I got the hospice certified. My focus has always been on end of life, has always been in hospice. I have utilized home health as a reimbursement source in the beginning. And then when I left the first hospice and went to a hospital-based agency, they were a home health care agency, and they hired me to get them Medicare hospice certification. And so I was managing both, but always my heart has been in end of life.
So how many years, Barbara, do you have in?
I started in 1981. So that's 40 some years.
Wow. That's amazing. That's amazing.
I was in my 30s, late 30s. And no, that would make me 40. Okay, I started when I was 40.
Wow.
If my numbers are right, I think so. Anyway, it has always, I should have never been a nurse. I should have been a social worker. My mother wanted me to be a nurse. And in the 50s, for a woman, your choice was you could be a teacher, a nurse, or a secretary. That was really your choices. And so she pushed nurse, and okay, I'll do that. Should have never been. It was a challenge to get through those 3 years. And so I never worked as a nurse because I was just glad to be out of it. Didn't like it at all. In my 30s, I started exploring life. What does it mean? What are we on this planet for? What is everything? I'm exploring everything. Read every self-help book you could find. And in that course of self-discovery, I thought, end of life, dying. This is something I can do. This is something I want to do. I have a belief system that supports me working in end of life, where most people are really afraid of death and of dying. I didn't have that fear. I thought, I can work in this. And so that's where I headed out and did.
So you were in administrative and leadership roles fairly early on in your career in working with hospice. Did you do much patient care?
5 years. I did 5 years of patient care. And in those 5 years, that was the training. That was learning. That's where all my knowledge came from, because nobody knew what dying was like. The medical model took care of diseases, and we had the one dying in the end of the hall, So it was those 5 years of being with someone in the months before death, right up to the moment of death. Because in those 5 years, our goal was to be with the family and the patient at the moment of death. That was what we were building up to. That's what built the trust, so that when that person died, the family would feel comfortable with us being the conductor and guiding that experience. So everything we did led up to the moment of death. And then we gradually eased off with the bereavement program. But my patients were my teachers. That's how I learned end of life. And in that time, I probably, and I'm not sure, I'm going to go with maybe 4 years into this, I became the director of the hospice, got it Medicare certified. And do I say I had a little disagreement with the board? And so on the spot, I quit. I said, if this is what you think hospice is, I'm out of here. I can't work for you. So then within a week, I was working at this hospital. And from that, in the hospital, I didn't see patients. It was strictly administrative for the rest of the years. But I did a lot of teaching, a lot of work with Kansas Hospice State Board.
A lot of leadership and administrative responsibilities built onto your clinical skills. So when you think back about the times that you spent at the bedside, what was your favorite part of patient care?
Oh, being there in the hours before death. and supporting and guiding the family to everyone's afraid. We're terrified of being with someone when they die or terrified of death. And to neutralize that fear, that was the gift of this work, was to take that family and gather them together and create a sacred memory for them to carry with them forever. And in order to do that, it had to be a sacred experience. And so I developed ways to guide and things to say and to ease the fear. You can never make the fear go away,
right?
But you can ease the fear. And that was what I was there for. Everything else led up to that moment. And that's what I missed when I got into administration.
So there's a skill set that comes with doing that kind of work, being at the bedside with someone who's at the very end of life. But there's also a gift. I'm sure you've had people say that to you, oh, it takes a very special person to do this kind of work. I think the skills can be taught and learned and honed, and grown as you need them to. But there's a gift that comes with it, a willingness to be open-minded in the experience and to be fully present and to understand the intensity and the sacredness of the moment. I think that's the gift that people who are end-of-life workers bring. That's what it sounds like was your experience.
Absolutely. In order to work in end of life, you have to recognize and conquer your own fears about dying and death. And we've all got them. If anyone says I'm not afraid, I don't believe it.
Yeah, that's a fib.
Yeah, it's a fib. So in order to do this work, we have to first know ourselves, because that's what we're bringing to the bedside. That's what we're bringing to the patients. And so we have to know where we stand, so that we can then support and guide others. And that doesn't always happen. And that's kind of a hurdle in working with end of life, is that the professionals have to know who they are and what they're bringing in order to be supportive.
Absolutely. All right. I love hearing you say, Barbara, that every end-of-life worker has fear. I think sometimes we feel like we have to be absolutely perfect with this completely calm demeanor, and we do want to bring that to the care of our patients. But inside, we do doubt, and we question what we're doing, and we always want to do the best for our patients and their families, their caregivers. I think that's such an important part to recognize in us, our own humanity, as we're going about doing this work.
Well, and if you think about it, our medical model gives us 1, 2, 3, it gives us protocol. It gives us this, what you do to accomplish this goal. When you're working with people, that doesn't fit. When you're working with people, you're going by the seat of your pants, and you need to know where you're going and have your own foundation. I used to stand on the front porch, and before I knocked on the door, I'd say, "Dear God, I seek to heal, not hurt," because you never know what you're going to find on the other side of the door, and it's instinctive. And so you've got to have that foundation to pull on. And that's why you've got to have an end of life foundation and knowledge to pull on, because it's not like anything else. You're dealing with humans and their fear and their emotions, and each person. There isn't even any protocol on how to die. There's some guidelines. There's things you look for, but certainly people don't always play by the rules. So you've got to be open enough and flexible enough to meet the needs and support and guide to help create this beautiful, sacred experience.
Absolutely. Barbara has more to share before this episode's over, so keep listening.
This special episode is made possible by our friends at the Death Deck. The Death Deck has created a new tool they call the End of Life Deck, or EOL Deck. The EOL Deck can be used by families, caregivers, and healthcare providers to help facilitate conversations about end-of-life wishes. Using multiple choice and open-ended questions, the EOL Deck has a casual tone that makes starting conversations about what matters most a little easier. Here's hospice nurse Helen Bauer from Hospice Navigation Services sharing the value of the EOL Deck.
The EOL Deck jumpstarts the conversations we all need to have. With finesse, compassion, and honesty, it treats end-of-life discussions with thoughtfulness and respect. Every end-of-life worker should have a deck.
To learn more about the EOL Deck and to purchase this helpful conversation starter, just visit thedeathdeck.com.
In your field work when you were at the bedside, what part of the job did you dread having to do? Every nurse that I know has something about nursing that they dislike, or it even makes them gag, or they'll avoid it at all costs. What part of patient care did you dread having to do?
The physical procedures. It just went against me to do anything that caused pain for another person. That was really hard for me. Right down to giving an injection, that hurt too. And that's why I didn't like nursing, because it's hands-on, hurt people in the idea of helping. But that is not a part of nursing that I'm comfortable with, and didn't like doing that. Changing dressings, that's okay. But anything that really causes pain, didn't want to do it.
Right. When you're highly empathic, as most hospice end-of-life workers are, that kind of thing really goes against what we do. It goes against our natures. We are not there to cause pain. We are there to alleviate and palliate symptoms and suffering. So, yeah, totally makes sense. Okay. So tell me, after all these years, tell me about a patient or a family that you're already starting to smile. I know you've got somebody that you remember that was special. Tell me somebody that you remember from when you were in the field at the bedside.
Actually, I have several people that pop into my head that are still in my heart. Most of the people I took care of children of God. But every once in a while, someone got in my heart and met Barbara's needs. And Charles was one of those people. My history is that I didn't really have a father that you would really think of as a supportive father, loving person. Charles took care of him for about 2 years, and he became the father image that I never had. His wife, and I won't say her name because it's unusual, but she and I became family. And that's not what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, let's be clear, right?
Let me get this across. That's not what you're supposed to do. But every once in a while, this person will get in your heart, and it's a thin ice that you're walking on. After Charles died, I stayed in touch. His wife moved to be with their son, and we corresponded, got a Christmas card every year. And the year I didn't get a Christmas card, I knew she was also gone and had gone to join Charles. But he is one of several that I still carry with me. But I don't advise it.
Yeah, you have to be careful with it, right? There have to be some boundaries that protect our patients and our families and protect us as well. But I agree. I have those stories too, people that I can still tell you exactly where they live. You know, their family members, I can name their kids, who their dog was. Yeah. We've all got them. And what a wonderful way to work, right? After 40, 50 years, you still have the memory of this particular patient and his wife. What other industry, what other career could you have where you get to do that? It's an amazing gift, I think, of working in end of life.
Oh, because we're really working with personhood. We're not working with disease. We're working with people. And not just one person, but the patient and the family. All of them are under our wing, so to speak. And the personhood is what it's about. End of life, working with that. And that's an incredible gift.
It is. We work within a system, right? We have the algorithms and the processes and the procedures, but we're working with people. And the personhood, it's very colorful sometimes, right? That caregiving group that might be surrounding a patient can be very volatile, I guess, maybe, or there might be a lot of dysfunction, but every family's different, every patient's different, and we get to see all of that. So it's a privilege. It really is. Okay, so let's talk about leadership, because you spent a lot of time in leadership roles, teaching, educating, leading, and you still do that in the work that you're doing today with your writing and your blogging and your resources at BK Books. But I think we have a tendency as end-of-life workers to discount people that are in leadership roles, that they're just looking at the money, they're just looking at the staffing, when in fact, they are leading a group of people who are caring for the dying. So there's a different type of wear and tear that comes in our leadership roles. What quality would you say is most important for someone to have who's in a leadership role in a hospice agency?
First off, I think they need a comprehensive knowledge of end of life. Way too often we've got leadership here that has the business model, and over here you've got your staff that has the patient medical model. And in order to work in end of life and understand your employees, you've got to understand end of life first, because then you can have the compassion, the empathy, the understanding that you're working with and and being involved is being responsible for a group of unique people. They're not like ordinary, regular medical people. There is a quality about those drawn to end of life that really needs an understanding and support that is different than regular human resources departments. And so first, as a leader, as a supervisor, make sure you've got knowledge of end of life. And then you have to make sure that your employees have comprehensive end of life knowledge. not just taking someone from the hospital floor and sending them out. You've got to make sure they have comprehensive knowledge. And as an administrator, you have to look out for your staff in a broader sense than you would just being a leader and administrator, because working with end of life has the emotional components that are not necessarily in every other healthcare job.
So when we're talking about leading a group of people that are doing this kind of work, these are empathic people. These are people that are often driven not by needing a job, although we do, right? We want to get paid, but they're a lot of times driven by what they consider a calling to work with people who are at end of life. It's a big deal for a lot of bedside clinicians. This is a work of their heart. It's a mission in their lives. So when we talk about leading these people and supporting them, we have to talk about self-care. And of course, I think the conversation around self-care really, really exploded during the pandemic. I think it became so obvious that we really had to focus on it. And I think that conversation has continued. But way back when, in the 80s, when you first started, was there much discussion about self-care when it came to hospice nursing and the other hospice disciplines?
There wasn't any talk about it. But we who were doing the work knew that we needed support. And so when I started, like in the 80s, and there's no rules, there was just another nurse and I, Jody, and Jody and I would meet every Friday night around 5, 6 o'clock at this local Mexican restaurant bar. And over margaritas, we would share and we would talk. And the two of us, that grew into a group of hospice nurse from VNA and a hospice nurse from Olathe. We would meet and download and talk because you couldn't tell your stories to anyone else. I started, and you may have heard this story, I'd come home and I'd tell Jack, this happened today and that happened. And he finally said, very shortly after I started, Barbara, you can't tell me this stuff. I can't handle it. Yeah. And so you can't bring it home. You've got to find someone that will understand what you're experiencing and what you're feeling. And if you carry it all inside and don't get it out, then you're going to be selling dresses in a few years because you're not going to be able to stay in end-of-life work. And just touching on leadership, the leaderships have to know that this kind of support is important and make it a part of their agency. And, there are ways to support your staff so that they can continue doing the work, because it's absolutely a necessity to support your staff in end of life work, or you won't have a staff.
Right. It has to be intentional, has to be ongoing, and it has to be proactive.
Yes.
Yeah. We have learned this. You can't wait until there's a crisis and then try to figure it out.
And also, you can't expect, because a lot of agencies will say, well, they if I've got an employee with a problem, they can come talk to me, or they can talk to the chaplain or the social worker. The thing is, we're not going to do that because we view our inability to deal with what we're emotionally dealing with as a weakness. And so I'm not going to show my supervisor or my other clinicians that I'm having trouble. And so I'm going to hold that all inside, and I won't be working here very long. So what as an agency needs to do, I think, and this is purely Barbara, is create a buddy system within the agency where you've got one person, one other nurse, one other social worker that is your peer that you can call and say, oh my God, you wouldn't believe what just happened, and download.
Yeah.
Because once you get it out, then you're not carrying it.
Yeah. So you and your colleagues at that point, Jody and the other people who ended up joining with you, you sort of instinctively began doing self-care over a meal and also in community with them, which can all be part of self-care.
Now, I have to say, I can remember one particularly horrific experience, just horrific. Yeah. And when it was over, and Jody and I were both involved, when it was over, we called our psychologist bereavement counselor and said, we've got to talk. And we stopped at a liquor store and picked up a bottle of wine and went to his office and spent hours there downloading and talking about this horrific experience. And that, I think, kept us healthy.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't have carried that by myself.
Well, and so what you're describing is a debriefing.
Oh,
after a crisis event. Absolutely. Which is because we have groups and protocols and processes and methods, models to do those groups, and we know when to have them. You guys instinctively figured out we need to do this, right?
yes.
So when you were younger and working like that, what part of self-care did you find the most challenging?
I don't even know that I did self-care. To be honest, I just did the work, and I knew why I was there, which a lot of people don't know why they're doing that work. And I don't think that I did anything that I considered I'm taking care of myself.
Mm-hmm.
Family was very important, and that was an outside activity. But really, I don't like to admit it, but hospice was my life. And if I have any regrets in my life, it's that I didn't have as much family attention as I think I should have. And that's my regret, is that it was all about hospice and my patients, and my family came second. And maybe that's why today family is so important to me, because I neglected it. I really did. They kind of, Jackie basically raised herself. And, that's my regret.
Yeah, I think a lot of hospice clinicians, a lot of end-of-life workers would say the same, even in this day. So what would you say was your greatest strength as a hospice clinician?
I think, okay, my dedication, that it was what my life was about. And I think my belief system that dying is natural and everybody's going to do it. And therefore, let's make this a sacred experience. I think that was one of the tools that I brought that was comforting to everyone, not just those people that I worked with and not just the families. That would lead to people skills, and maybe people skills was my biggest asset.
Yeah, the soft skills, as so called. Where do you think you needed improvement? Where did you need to grow?
I needed to, I think, probably in hindsight, to be less consumed with the work I was doing. And yet, if I hadn't been that all-encompassing, I wouldn't have been able to bring to the field the knowledge that I have. It was that dedication, that absolutely being consumed with my patient's family and end-of-life hospice work. That's why I can do what I do today. And that's how I learned.
Yeah. Well, my last question was going to be, if you weren't a nurse, what other discipline on the end-of-life team would you be? But I think you've already answered that question. Would you be a hospice social worker if you weren't a nurse?
I would have been if I had social work skills. However, if I had been a hospice social worker, I would not have the knowledge that I do today. I would not have the knowledge to say to social workers today, there's no reason for you not to be that person, that conductor, that support person at the moment of death. There's no reason why a chaplain can't be that person. It doesn't have to be a nurse to be there at the moment of death. You just need someone who understands the process and knows what to do. I mean, your Stevens Ministries, you can train them. You can train your, what do they call it? Transition volunteers. And that doesn't sound right, but there's
11th hour volunteers.
Thank you.
Yes.
That's it.
Yes.
It's all about training so that someone's there.
Right.
You just don't want the families to be alone in the hours before death.
Right. Barbara, this is the first in our series. We're going to have 3 more discussions, and I'm so honored that you're sharing all of this with me. It's amazing. How can my listeners connect with you, read your blog, check out your social media? How can they find your products?
Go to bkbooks.com, and that's the website. Barbara at bkbooks.com is my email. And I don't talk on the phone, but I answer my emails. So if I can be supportive or offer guidance, send me an email. And look at my materials. They're your tools to give to the family, to support them and create that knowledge for them to have a sacred experience.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Barbara. As always, you're perfect. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Heart of Hospice podcast. Check out our sponsor in the show notes, and please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. We would appreciate it if you would share this episode with your friends and family and anyone who needs to know more about hospice. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.